By popular demand, we are checking out the HBM nuclear tech mob for Minecraft. This original video is done by the Blue Crusader, and this is just an overall mod showcase. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tyler Folse. I'm a nuclear engineer with a little over 10 years of experience in the commercial nuclear power industry, from engineering to operations to emergency response. I don't claim to know everything there is nuclear, but I can certainly share some knowledge. Get right into it.
Right now I'm standing next to a nuclear warhead.
Of course it's green, the green indicating the radiation damage. As far as trying to do this in real life, it all depends on how shielded the thing really is, but this guy's right on top of it. No, don't do that.
Trench mask, which is basically a protection mask to protect against airborne particles and chemical gas hazards.
Yep, a mask will stop some things. I mean, it's why they're recommended for being worn to protect against COVID, so it's better than nothing.
If you're wondering how to create this, we use this cloth, and we can drop the cloth into water to make damp cloth, or we can literally just grab the cloth, right-click on it, and turn it into urinated rags.
Okay, clearly a reference to World War I know, and there the idea is to protect you against chlorine gas. And the idea is chlorine is water soluble and urine is mostly water. And it wouldn't do as much as an actual gas mask, but that would help a little bit. Better than nothing, but still wouldn't recommend sitting in the chlorine gas. I mean, again, better than nothing, but ain't gonna protect you much.
Okay, so we use this to find underground oil deposits, which we can place a pump jack or derrick.
I guess you gotta go for your machinery, your oil, before you get to the nuclear stuff. It makes sense for a game like this to have a tech tree. That's pretty common in a lot of video games.
We can then begin to create what's called the centrifuge. So the centrifuge will triple ore outputs, then the ore acidizer, another block, will basically crystallize ores, which
Centrifuges are used to enrich uranium in real life. I wonder if that mechanic's going to be present in that when he gets to that.
isotope separation chamber, which is the full name for the silex, which definitely does look like it would be inside a nuclear reactor, which is obviously the point of it.
Wouldn't be in a nuclear reactor, but it would be in an enrichment facility, which ultimately leaks the fuel for the reactor. But that's typically done off-site. The plant that I worked at didn't have an enrichment facility right next to it or anything.
We have the FEL. All of these blocks in this mod have some really cool GUIs. And then for generators, we have the simple diesel generator. We have the more complex industrial generator, which has a lot more inputs and space for things like gasoline and diesel and heating oil. It has tanks in it, engine lubricant. There's a lot of different slots in this thing. These
are cool looking. Yeah, diesels, big generators. This is a pretty cool looking mod. I like it. I like mods that can educate people on nuclear stuff. No, they don't have to be 100% accurate, but they can at least get people interested and inspire people to look a little bit further. It's good stuff.
And the nuclear reactor, which is the more complex of all the blocks.
Whoa, looks like some big tank right there. Okay, look, we got the little checkerboard, the Scrabble board. I'm guessing for arranging the fuel assemblies. It's what that sort of thing kind of looks like in real life.
See, upon first glance, looks a little bit challenging and confusing, right? Underground, we'll find various different blocks. So we have naturally occurring strata, which are special mineral layers and formations. We have schist, which are strata that are blue lithium containing layers which are filled with either uranium, iron, copper, asbestos, or other ores which you can use yourself.
I don't know what you'd actually use the asbestos for. I wouldn't recommend that. But yeah, it's got uranium in there. Guess you can say schist's got real.
Now, depth rock contains large quantities of rarer materials and minerals, such as zirconium and boron. But
zirconium for the cladding and boron for control rods. Awesome.
Explosives to actually clear these. Now you can see this is actually schist over here, which as you can see, if we hover over it, it's actually radioactive, which is why it gives us blindness. So you can see
blindness, huh? I mean, a targeted dose to the eyes specifically, but if you're looking at a whole body dose, it's radiation's gonna cause nausea, vomiting, those sort of things first. Blindness isn't first unless you're talking about a targeted lens of the eye dose, which wouldn't be the case here.
These are kind of toxic minerals, but you will find these underground. This is the schist subsect of them. Then
So a lot of these look like they'd be toxic as well. I mentioned lead earlier, so you're going to have some toxicity and radioactivity. I wonder if the game like combined those two things together or not. I don't know.
Also have deep rock, which this is actually the cleaned ores from those, so deep cleaned ores which come from deep rock. And zirconium, for an example, this destroyed only by explosives. This is what it looks like underground. So this would be the zirconium block, which kind of looks like some kind of deep slate or some block from the nether. And then we also have a block of boron, for an example. So this is also another underground mineral.
Control blocks.
Boron ingots form the boron block. Throughout the example earlier, for this zirconium ore, we need explosives to blow this up. So I'll show you. And we're going to set this off with a flint and steel just to show you.
Whoa.
It will explode once we use explosives. Now, I was mentioning that certain blocks are radioactive, so let's actually talk about radiation in the mod and radioactivity. Enough exposure to this radiation in the mod can actually cause the player harm, so this is something you need to actually be careful of. Now, the first step is prevention for this, so actually prevent taking the damage and being exposed in the first place. So we need to limit our exposure, and we can do this by wearing protective gear. So we can use cladding, which are basically applicable to actually clothing and armor. So you can see we have
Interesting cladding for the clothing and armor. I mean, it's usually cladding around the actual uranium fuel, which is why fresh fuel, since it's coated in the cladding, which is typically zirconium, or some sort of alloy with zirconium, you're not going to get any dose. You can touch fresh fuel assemblies. Now, used fuel, a lot of times fuel is recycled in a nuclear power plant. You're going to get some, because it has the fission products in it, that's where all the dose comes from. But just uranium, fresh uranium, because it's protected in that cladding, you're fine.
Tiers of cladding. As you can see, we have obsidian skin. The tiers of cladding obviously makes it stronger. And then also we have the hazmat suits, okay? Now the hazmat suits actually need a filter installed into them, but they're made from reinforced hazmat cloth to actually produce them.
What's interesting is typical radiation worker clothing, it's not really a full hazmat suit necessarily. It's just it's a layer of protective clothing, but you can have it with the respirator, an SCBA, if you're doing this in a hazardous atmosphere for whatever reason, but that kind of depends on the individual hazard. But the main idea behind wearing protective clothing from radiation is to avoid the spread of contamination. It won't actually protect you from radiation dose any more than regular clothing would anyway, but it will prevent you from getting contaminated, especially in internal contamination where you can inhale the stuff. So that's what it's mainly used for. But you can go in radiation areas, in a radiological controlled area that are not contaminated, and you wouldn't wear protective clothing because it doesn't really do you any good at that point.
So, as you can see, I just opened up that starter kit and it gave me some hazmat leggings and it gave me kind of like a basic hazmat armor set, just to show you guys what a working hazmat suit will look like in game. And you heard that kind of like radiation sound you'd expect to see off a game like Fallout, and that obviously tells me that it's working, right? But the mask has no...
I didn't hear anything. It's referring to like the clicks from a Geiger counter. I didn't hear that.
Filter. So we're just going to spawn a gas mask filter, and as you can see now we have a filter and we can actually breathe in radioactive zones.
Again, it's only if there's airborne contamination is where you want the respirators. If the radiation hazards aren't airborne, it's not going to make a difference if you're wearing a respirator or not. In fact, there are even some airborne radioactive zones that you're better off not wearing a respirator, but it really depends on the job. It depends how long you're going to be there. Because wearing a respirator does slow you down, and how much dose you get is directly proportional with how long you're in the zone. So if wearing the respirator reduces your dose by a factor of 2, but the job takes 3 times longer, it's not worth it. All this just depends on the individual task and what the radiation protection folks brief you on before you actually do the job.
As for uranium enrichment, there's a few different options for fuels to use for our nuclear reactor. So we can use a natural uranium, we can use thorium fuel, but if we're looking for something much more powerful, we can set up an enrichment cascade, which we'd set up with 2 gas centrifuges to produce uranium fuel with leftover uranium-238 as a...
So depending on the level of enrichment you want, so for a nuclear power plant, we're talking 3 to 5%. You're going to want more than 2. Not to mention you can have cascading centrifuges. You can have them recycle and feed in just so you can kind of feed them in multiple times. I can understand for gameplay purposes 2 just being good and just having one simplistic uranium fuel, because it can get complicated real fast and in a way that's probably less than fun. So I can understand why they did this for the mod, but so far it's a pretty good mod.
Byproduct, and we'll have to transmute the natural uranium into yellow cake, then uranium hexafluoride to do so. So we have some basic schist uranium ore over here to show you some uranium. Then we have the 2 gas centrifuges, and this is the pieces of uranium fuel
nuggets
over here, the yellow cake, and also the uranium hexafluoride tanks, which we need to use. So page number.
And that's why you need it as a gas, just so the centrifuges can physically separate the gas. Trying to do that with a solid, not going to work out.
14, the Chicago pile. So we can breed reactor-grade plutonium, which is a more powerful fuel from natural uranium, using what's called the Chicago pile. We stack graphite blocks and drill into those blocks, and we can then insert fuel rods.
So reactor-grade plutonium, that's a little more obscure, at least when it comes to starting off with one. There are designs that use it, but it's mostly uranium. The uranium-235, 3 to 5% enriched. You can also do it with natural uranium. There are reactors that use that too, but there's the trade-off between that and using heavy water, which uses deuterium instead of the normal hydrogen-1 isotope. So you either enrich the uranium or you enrich the water. But reactor-grade plutonium is a little out there from a starting point. What I will say, though, is uranium, over the course of a fuel cycle, will convert into plutonium, just because some of the uranium-238, which doesn't fission, or isn't fissile, will absorb a neutron, turn into uranium-239, and then undergo a couple of beta decays, which will take it to neptunium, and then plutonium-239, which is fissile. So by the end of life, in a pressurized water reactor like the one that I worked at, you can end up with upwards of 20% of your fuel being plutonium by the time you burn it all up, just because you create some of that plutonium. But you don't start out that way.
To breed into plutonium and neutron source rods, such as radium, beryllium, to begin the reaction. We need to make sure to test the design, spacing out.
Even getting into neutron sources, that's cool. And yep, radium beryllium is a typical neutron source. What you typically combine something heavy with beryllium, and that usually gives you a pretty reliable neutron source. Another one is plutonium beryllium, is another example.
The amount of blocks, which is something that may be necessary to prevent overheating. So this is reactor-grade plutonium ingots. Then we have Chicago pile uranium rods, blocks of graphite.
And the Chicago pile, that was a very early end. When I think of Minecraft nuclear reactors, that's kind of what we had in real life. It looked like a Minecraft reactor. Probably the closest thing I've seen to real-life Minecraft.
It's created by graphite ingots. We have thorium fuel rods, plutonium ingots, the beryllium neutron source rods over here, and also the neutron source pellets. So as you can see, these are just some examples of these blocks, just to show you guys. So onto the Zernox GCR page of the guidebook. So we can create our first real source of energy. This is called the Zernox nuclear reactor, and these nuclear reactors kind of require a complex setup, at least.
Zernox. Okay, this is made up for the purpose of the game. So graphite and carbon dioxide. Oh, I can see this is loosely based off of the Magnox reactor. Yeah, this was a goofy one. Graphite moderator, kind of like Chernobyl in that regard, but gas cooled. Gas being the carbon dioxide, and magnesium oxide being the name of the cladding is where it gets its names from. This is another weird choice because, again, you're using a different object as the moderator, being the graphite, that the thing that slows down the neutrons so they can cause fissions, and the gas being something different to cool it. Light water reactors use water as both the moderator and the coolant, as just one working fluid. And you see the carbon dioxide gets transferred to a steam generator. So it's just another way to boil water, just like any other type of nuclear reactor. And the secondary plant of water going through a heat exchanger to turn a turbine to produce electricity looks like the secondary plant of anything that uses a steam cycle, including coal and natural gas. One of the reasons why it's safer than Chernobyl is, well, you're already in a gas state. So there's no... It was safe at the time because the natural circulation of the gas could sufficiently cool the reactor down after you shut it down with the control rods. But it's just an old design. It used old pressure vessels, which wouldn't do as good of a job at absorbing radiation compared to more modern designs. And yeah, there's a reason why it's not used, and just a whole bunch of other technical issues with it just being that much older. I'm kind of surprised to see that reactor, albeit with a different name, show up in a game. That's interesting.
Also than other power sources. So we want to have a good source of water, so we can use the heavy infinite water source tank for this, and we want to remove heat from our reactor's core and boil this water into steam. And we can use this pressure, but we need a sufficient amount of carbon dioxide.
Now, I'm not sure what they're using the heavy water for. It's not being used as a coolant, it's not being used as a moderator, because we have the graphite and the carbon dioxide
to actually do this process. Now, if you want just enough pressure but not too much, then you also need 3 steam turbines to utilize the created steam to then make energy out of it. And the steam turbine or industrial steam turbine is most optimal. And finally, a condenser or auxiliary cooling tower to condense the leftover steam back.
I like they included the secondary plant systems. That's really cool. 3 turbine is an interesting number. The plant I worked at just had one really, really big one. Chernobyl had 2, and yeah, it's usually one turbine per unit, but this might be a flashback to olden days where they didn't make turbines as big.
To water, where it can either be voided or recycled into a cooling loop and start from the beginning. So this is our Zernox nuclear reactor, in case you haven't seen it from earlier. This is the heavy infinite source water tank, the universal fluid tanks, which contain carbon dioxide. Then we have the steam.
They're using heavy water in the secondary plant? That's really not needed. Or maybe it's heavy. Maybe it's heavy as in there's a smaller tank too. Okay. That's a bit confusing.
The industrial steam turbine, the steam condenser, and the auxiliary cooling towers. So I'm just going to show you the GUI inside each block. Obviously, the bigger the machinery, the more complex it's going to be. So now that I've taken you through the in-game guide, we're going to take a look at a few other of the aspects and features of the HBM nuclear tech mod, because this mod is so massive and it's hard to condense it all into one video. So as you can see, we have a bunch of heavy gun turrets over here. So we're going to spawn these and I'm going to show you them so we can check them out. There's some crazy weapons in this mod. I'm surprised I haven't actually featured.
I mean, I guess, yeah, you need to defend your nuclear plant. Can't go into specifics about what type of defenses we had, but it's interesting they're including this aspect.
This is nuclear tech mod bombs. We have the little boy,
sure,
which is actually a real bomb. The Fat Man, the Ivy Mike, the Tsar Bomber, which is also the name of a watch company. We have the prototype, the Flayer, the Blue Rinse, the Balefire bomb.
Okay, I've never heard of any of those after the Tsar Bomber.
And the custom nuke.
Custom nuke.
Now, if you right click on them, there are obviously ways to actually activate these guys. And there's obviously timers you can type in as well. And you require actually items and inputs to actually launch them, okay? Because these are just actually the shells of the weapons, not the full weapons itself. It actually requires components to actually trigger them.
Sure.
I also have this airstrike designator. And when you right click and call an airstrike, it physically calls in a plane to fly overhead, and it just bombs absolutely everything.
Wow.
So if you're wondering how to turn stuff into a wasteland, this is how. I'm just going to keep spamming airstrikes, and these planes are just going to keep going on overhead and just dropping carpet bombs all over the world.
Not sure if those are supposed to be atomic bombs or not. It's generic, but it's funny to watch them.
In the ground, you may be able to also find some of these bombs, which are just dropped down below. And these are discarded warheads, which is just in the ground. Also down here...
If you're on familiar channel, you know I have a thing about green glowing nuke stuff. That's not what any of it looks like. Except for uranium glass, that's a little different.
It's like a crashed, what looks like a spaceship or some kind of plane. So we'll jump inside here. It's kind of like a base which has been discarded. And these places you can find explosives, you can find chests, you can also find like mini rooms inside some of them. And these are going to be the best places to get resources in. So at the start of the game, if you can find one of these, this is going to be the absolute godsend of a place to actually get things to actually start off in the mod. So if you don't have anything from the start, this is really one of the best places.
You say Nuka-Cola Quantum as in from Fallout?
Is Nuka-Cola just like off Fallout? Advanced batteries, grenades.
Whoa, cluster grenades, okay. That was a really cool mod. I liked anything that showcases nuclear technology, even obscure stuff. I haven't heard anything about the Magnox reactor since I was looking at obscure designs in college. That really takes me back. Thanks for all the recommendations on this. I really appreciate it. Again, anything that inspires people to look at more fun nuclear stuff is just awesome. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.